True mates see past the surface. That's what Kathy's grandmother whispered on her deathbed, pressing the ancient moonstone into her trembling hands. But when you're cursed to become a hideous beast by your own mate's mother, you learn that even wolves judge with their eyes first. The moonstone caught the dying light from the hospital room's single window, its surface smooth as river glass, warm as fresh blood. Kathy had never understood why her grandmother clutched it so desperately in those final moments, her voice barely a rasp as she spoke of old magic and forgotten bonds. Now, 3 years later, as Kathy stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of the packhouse bathroom, she wondered if the old woman had seen this moment coming, seen the curse that would twist her face into something so grotesque that even her own mate couldn't bear to look at her. Chapter 1. The Outsider's Struggle. Kathy had never belonged here. Not really. The Silver Moon Pack tolerated her presence the way you tolerate a splinter, uncomfortable, irritating, but not quite painful enough to dig out. She was human in a world of wolves, plain in a pack that valued beauty, quiet in a hierarchy that rewarded dominance. Every morning she woke in the packhouse feeling like an imposter. Every evening she fell asleep, knowing she'd failed again to prove her worth. The great hall buzzed with the usual pre-dinner chaos. Pack members shifted in and out of their wolf forms with casual ease, children playing tag between the massive oak tables while their parents discussed territory disputes and hunting schedules. Kathy moved through it all like a ghost, setting down plates and refilling water glasses, her human hands steady where claws would fumble, her human ears catching conversations not meant for her. The blood moon ceremony is tomorrow. Stephen's voice carried across the hall, rich and commanding as always. Her mate, though he rarely acted like it, stood at the head table beside his mother Morgana and his sister Lydia. Even from across the room, Kathy could see the way conversation stopped when he spoke, how pack members angled their bodies toward him like flowers seeking sun. Morgana's laugh cut through the air like breaking glass. About time you chose a proper Luna, son. The pack has been patient, but patience has its limits. Kathy's hands trembled as she set down a pitcher of mead. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of trying to earn a place in this family, and still Morgana spoke as if she were invisible, as if the ceremony tomorrow wasn't about choosing between candidates, but about Stephen finally doing what everyone expected, what everyone wanted. The choice is mine to make, Mother. Stephen's tone held a warning, but his eyes found Kathy across the room, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw something soft there, something that might have been affection, or pity, or just exhaustion with his mother's constant pressure. Lydia, golden-haired and perfect, shifted restlessly beside them. Her wolf form was a thing of legend, pure white, with silver-tipped fur, graceful as moonlight on water. When she changed, the whole pack stopped to admire her. When Kathy entered a room, conversations faltered not from awe, but from awkwardness. The pack needs strength, Morgana continued, her voice dropping low enough that only supernatural hearing could catch it. They need a Luna who can shift, who can hunt, who can produce strong heirs. They need someone who belongs. The words hit Kathy like physical blows, each one finding its mark. She couldn't shift, had never felt even the whisper of wolf blood in her veins. She couldn't hunt, had tried once, and spent the entire night lost in the forest, while the pack searched for her, and heirs. Well, 3 years of trying had produced nothing but disappointment, and Stephen's increasingly distant embraces. I know what the pack needs, Stephen said, but his voice lacked conviction. Kathy forced herself to keep moving, keep working, keep pretending she couldn't hear every cruel word. She'd learned that survival in the pack meant making herself useful enough to keep but invisible enough to ignore. She cooked their meals, tended their wounded, organized their celebrations, all the duties that required human hands and human patience. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary, and necessity was the only value she could claim. The kitchen was her sanctuary, the one place where her humanity was an asset instead of a weakness. Pack wolves could tear raw meat from bone, but they couldn't fold delicate pastry or coax complex flavors from simple ingredients. Kathy had spent hours learning the preferences of every pack member, memorizing who liked their meat bloody, and who preferred it seasoned, who had allergies, and who had cravings. Tonight she'd prepared Stephen's favorite venison stew with wild mushrooms, thick bread still warm from the oven, honey cakes that reminded him of his childhood. It was a peace offering, a desperate attempt to remind him of the small ways she tried to care for him, even if she couldn't give him the fierce partnership he'd grown up expecting from a mate. She ladled the stew into his bowl with extra care, arranging the bread beside it just the way he liked. When she carried it to the head table, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, her chance to remind him that love didn't always come with fangs and fur. "Your favorite," she said softly, setting the bowl before him. Stephen looked up at her then, really looked, and for a heartbeat she saw the man she'd fallen in love with. Not the Alpha's son, not the pack's future leader, just Stephen, kind-eyed and gentle-handed, the boy who'd found her lost in the forest during her first pack gathering and walked her home by moonlight. "Thank you," he said, and his fingers brushed hers as he reached for the spoon. The touch sent warmth racing up her arm, such a small thing, but in the pack's rigid hierarchy, every gesture carried weight. A public acknowledgement, a moment of tenderness. It was more than she'd had from him in months. "Stephen," Morgana's voice cracked like a whip, "we need to discuss tomorrow's ceremony, privately." The warmth died. Stephen's hand withdrew, his attention already shifting away. "Of course, Kathy, we'll talk later." But they wouldn't, and they both knew it. Later never came for them anymore. Later was always postponed, always interrupted, always relegated to tomorrow, or next week, or when things calmed down. Later had become another word for never. Kathy retreated to the kitchen, her sanctuary feeling more like a prison with every passing hour. Through the serving window, she could see the pack celebrating, laughing, sharing stories of hunts and battles she'd never be part of. Their world was one of instinct and violence, honor and territory. Her world was flower and herbs, small kindnesses and quiet devotion. The moon rose full and silver outside the kitchen windows, tomorrow's blood moon still hidden behind the curve of earth and time. Somewhere in the great hall, Stephen was choosing his Luna, choosing his future, choosing everything that mattered to the pack. And Kathy was exactly where she'd always been, on the outside, looking in, hoping for scraps of attention from a man who'd never really been hers to begin with. But as she kneaded tomorrow's bread, her grandmother's moonstone pressed warm against her chest, and something whispered in the back of her mind that this was not how her story would end. The old woman's words echoed in the silence. True mates see past the surface. Perhaps it wasn't about Stephen seeing past hers. Perhaps it was about finding someone who could see past their own. The ceremony was tomorrow. Everything would change tomorrow. Kathy just didn't know how much. If stories like Kathy's remind you that worth isn't determined by bloodlines or beauty, subscribe to join others who believe hidden strength deserves recognition. Chapter 2. False Dawn. The morning of the blood moon ceremony dawned crisp and golden, autumn air sharp with the promise of change. Kathy woke before sunrise, as she always did, her body trained by years of serving others to rise before her own needs could assert themselves. But today felt different, charged with possibility, electric with hope she didn't dare name. Stephen had found her in the kitchen last night, after the pack had finally dispersed to their homes and dens. He'd stood in the doorway like a man gathering courage, his dark hair mussed from running anxious fingers through it, his usually confident posture uncertain. "Kathy," he'd said, and her name had sounded different in his mouth, gentler, more deliberate. "Tomorrow, when I choose my Luna," she'd held her breath, flour-dusted hands frozen over the bread dough. "I want you to know that what we have, what we've built together, it matters. You matter. To me, to the pack, even if they don't always show it." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise, but it was acknowledgement. An acknowledgement felt like sunlight, after years of shadow. Now, as she prepared the ceremonial feast, Kathy allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to stand beside Stephen as his chosen Luna. To finally have a place at the head table instead of serving it. To be seen as something more than the convenient human who kept their household running. The great hall had been transformed overnight. Garlands of autumn leaves draped from the rafters, their reds and golds catching the morning light like captured fire. The ceremonial platform at the hall's center stood ready, ancient symbols carved into its wooden surface, telling the story of Luna selections, stretching back centuries. Tonight, under the blood-red moon, Stephen would stand on that platform and speak the words that would reshape the pack's future. Nervous, Lydia appeared beside her, moving with the silent grace all wolves possessed. She looked ethereal in her ceremonial dress, white silk that matched her wolf form, silver threads that caught light like moonbeams. Kathy's throat tightened. Should I be? That depends. Lydia's voice held an odd note, almost apologetic, on what you're hoping for. Before Kathy could ask what she meant, the kitchen door swung open and Morgana entered like a storm system, her presence immediately changing the atmosphere. The former Luna moved with predatory grace, her silver hair swept back to reveal the intricate tattoos that marked her status, ancient symbols that spoke of power and position, of battles won and rivals defeated. Ladies, Morgana's voice could have frozen summer. I trust you're both prepared for tonight's revelations. The word revelations sat heavy in the air, weighted with meaning Kathy couldn't quite grasp. Lydia shifted beside her, suddenly tense. Mother, Lydia began, but Morgana cut her off with a look. Some things are better learned through experience, daughter. Some lessons can only be taught by pain. Morgana's eyes fixed on Kathy with laser intensity. Don't you agree, dear? The endearment felt like a threat. Kathy had learned to read Morgana's moods the way sailors read storm clouds, essential survival skills for navigating the treacherous waters of pack politics. Right now, every instinct screamed danger, but she couldn't identify the source. I should finish the preparations, Kathy murmured, hoping to escape whatever game Morgana was playing. Oh yes, do finish. Morgana's smile was all teeth. We wouldn't want anything to be incomplete for tonight's ceremony. The hours crawled by like wounded things. Kathy threw herself into the familiar rhythm of preparation, checking and rechecking the feast, arranging flowers, polishing silver until it gleamed. Physical work helped quiet the anxiety that buzzed under her skin like electricity before a storm. As afternoon faded to evening, pack members began arriving in their ceremonial finest. The unmated females clustered together, their nervous energy filling the hall with the scent of anticipation and competition. They all knew what everyone knew, that Stephen would choose his sister Lydia, keeping the bloodline pure and the power consolidated. It was the logical choice, the political choice, the choice that would strengthen the pack's position among the supernatural hierarchies. But logic wasn't the only force at play tonight. Stephen entered the hall just as the sun touched the horizon, and conversations stilled. He wore traditional ceremonial garb, leather-dyed deep brown, silver clasps that caught torchlight, the heir's circlet resting on his dark hair. He looked like what he was, a prince among wolves, powerful and commanding, and utterly out of Kathy's league. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and he smiled. Not the political smile he wore for pack functions, not the careful expression he used when his mother was watching, but a real smile, warm and private, and meant just for her. Hope bloomed in Kathy's chest, like spring after endless winter. The ceremony began with ancient rituals, words spoken in the old tongue while incense burned and drums beat a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. Elder wolves recounted the history of Luna selections, the sacred bond between alpha and chosen mate that formed the foundation of pack strength. Finally, Stephen stepped onto the platform. The hall fell silent, except for the crackling of torches and the distant howl of wolves greeting the rising blood moon. Tonight, his voice carried to every corner of the great hall. I claim my Luna. The words sent shivers down Kathy's spine. This was it, the moment everything changed. I have considered the worthiness of every unmated female in our pack. I have weighed bloodlines and strength, wisdom and loyalty, But the choice of a Luna is not made by logic alone. Stephen's gaze swept the hall, touching briefly on each potential candidate before finding Kathy in the shadows near the kitchen door. A Luna must be chosen by the heart as well as the mind. She must be a woman whose courage doesn't require claws, whose strength doesn't require supernatural blood, whose love doesn't require anything but the willingness to give it freely. Kathy's heart stopped. He wasn't talking about Lydia. Those words, courage without claws, strength without supernatural blood, he was talking about her. Therefore, Stephen's voice rang out clear and strong. I choose Kathy as my Luna, my mate, and the future mother of this pack's heirs. The silence that followed felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. Then the hall erupted, gasps of shock, murmurs of disbelief, a few scattered cheers from pack members who'd grown fond of her quiet service over the years. Kathy couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. Stephen had chosen her, publicly, formally, irreversibly. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. True mates see past the surface. Maybe the old woman had been right. Maybe love really could conquer all. Stephen stepped down from the platform, his eyes never leaving hers as he crossed the hall. Pack members parted before him like water, creating a clear path between them. When he reached her, he took her hands in his, strong, warm, steady. Will you accept? He asked, though the formal question was mere ceremony now. Will you stand as Luna of the Silver Moon Pack? Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes, I accept. The words had barely left her lips when Stephen pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply while the pack cheered around them. For one perfect shining moment, Kathy felt like she belonged, not just to the pack, but to Stephen, to this life, to a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. But as their lips parted and Stephen turned to accept congratulations from pack members, Kathy caught sight of Morgana standing at the edge of the crowd. The former Luna's face was marble pale, her eyes burning with something that made Kathy's blood turn cold. Over my dead body, Morgana whispered, her words lost in the celebration, but somehow reaching Kathy's ears with perfect clarity. The hope that had bloomed in Kathy's chest, withered, replaced by a certainty as sharp as broken glass. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chapter 3. The Curse Unleashed. The celebrations continued long into the night, but Kathy found herself pulled away from the revelry by an urgent need for air, for quiet, for a moment to process the enormity of what had just happened. She slipped out of the great hall through the servants' entrance, her new status as Luna-elect not yet enough to override years of habit. The garden behind the pack house was silver-washed under the blood moon, its familiar paths offering comfort in the midst of so much change. Kathy had walked these routes countless times during sleepless nights, when the weight of not belonging pressed too heavily on her chest. Tonight, she thought, might be the last time she'd walk them as an outsider. Enjoying your moment of triumph, dear? Kathy spun around to find Morgana emerging from the shadow of the old oak, her ceremonial robes making her look like something conjured from nightmare. The former Luna moved with predatory grace, each step deliberate and measured. Morgana, I thought you could steal what wasn't yours. Morgana's voice was silk over steel. Thought you could seduce my son away from his true purpose with your pathetic human weakness. I never stole anything, Kathy said, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. Stephen chose me, freely. Stephen is young and foolish, blinded by sentiment and misplaced sympathy. Morgana circled her like a wolf stalking prey. But don't mistake his temporary infatuation for acceptance. You will never be Luna of this pack. You will never bear strong heirs. You will never be anything more than what you are. A weak, worthless human who doesn't know her place. Something in Morgana's tone made Kathy's skin crawl. This wasn't just anger or disappointment. This was something darker, more dangerous. You can't change what happened tonight, Kathy said, though her voice shook. The pack witnessed Stephen's choice. It's done. Morgana's laugh was like breaking glass. Oh, my naive little human. You think pack law is stronger than blood magic? You think ceremony is stronger than curse? The word curses hit Kathy like a physical blow. What are you talking about? I am more than Stephen's mother, more than former Luna. Morgana's eyes began to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with reflected moonlight. I am witch-born, daughter of the old bloodlines, keeper of magics that predate your precious pack traditions. The air around them began to change, growing thick and electric. The blood moon overhead seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. You want to be Luna? You want to stand beside my son and pretend you belong? Morgana raised her hands, and power crackled between her fingers like captured lightning. Let's see how long his love lasts when he can't bear to look at you. No, Kathy backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Ancient magic pressed against her from all sides, trapping her in place. Hear me, spirits of the old ways. Morgana's voice rose in ritual cadence. This pretender seeks to claim what isn't hers, to rule over those she cannot understand, to bear children she cannot protect. Let her face show the truth of what she is: hideous, worthless, unworthy of love or acceptance. The magic hit Kathy like a physical force, sending her to her knees in the garden's soft earth. Pain unlike anything she'd ever experienced tore through her body, starting at her face and spreading outward like poison in her veins. Her skin felt like it was burning, stretching, changing. She tried to scream, but the sound that emerged was barely human, a rasping, horrible noise that made her own ears ring. Her hands flew to her face and found flesh that felt wrong, twisted, grotesque. The curse will break, Morgana said, her voice now conversational, almost kind, when the true Alpha King claims you as his mate. But what Alpha would want something so hideous? What king would choose a monster for his queen? Kathy collapsed forward, her strength deserting her, as the transformation completed itself. When she tried to speak, to beg, to plead, only that horrible rasping sound emerged from her ruined throat. You should thank me, Morgana continued. I've simply revealed your true nature. Now everyone will see what I've always seen, that you're nothing but a beast pretending to be human. Footsteps crashed through the garden, pack members drawn by the sound of Kathy's screams, by the taste of magic in the air. She heard Stephen's voice shouting her name, heard the concern and fear in his tone. Kathy? What happened? Where? Stephen's words cut off abruptly, as his eyes found her crouched in the garden, and Kathy knew with absolute certainty that whatever she'd become was even worse than she'd feared. The silence stretched impossibly long. When Stephen finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. What? What is that thing? Not who. What? Kathy tried to lift her head, tried to show him that she was still herself inside this cursed form, but Stephen stepped backward, his face twisted with revulsion. Get it away from here, he said, still not looking directly at her. Whatever that thing is, I can't, the smell alone makes my wolf recoil. Pack members pressed closer, drawn by curiosity and held back by instinctive fear. Kathy caught glimpses of familiar faces, people she'd cooked for, tended, served for 3 years, and saw nothing but disgust and horror in their expressions. It's Kathy. Lydia's voice cut through the crowd, soft but clear. Mother, what did you do? I revealed the truth, Morgana replied calmly. A curse that shows her real nature. Only when the true Alpha King claims her will it break. And what king would claim something so monstrous? The crowd began to disperse, pack members unable to bear the sight or smell of her cursed form. Even Lydia backed away, though her eyes held something that might have been pity. Stephen lingered the longest, staring at her with the expression of someone trying to reconcile 2 impossible realities. The woman he'd chosen as Luna and the creature crouched before him couldn't be the same person. His mind simply refused to accept it. I'm sorry, he whispered finally. I'm so sorry, but I can't. My wolf won't let me come near you. The pack would never accept. He turned and walked away, leaving Kathy alone in the garden, with nothing but moonlight and the echo of her own ruined voice. The curse would break when the true Alpha King claimed her. Morgana's words were a prophecy, and a punishment rolled into one, offering hope while ensuring that hope remained forever out of reach. What king would choose a monster? What alpha would claim something too hideous for even her own mate to bear? Kathy knew the answer, even as she struggled to her feet and stumbled toward the forest that bordered the pack's territory. No one would choose her now. The curse wasn't just changing her appearance, it was ensuring she'd die alone, forgotten, abandoned by everyone she'd ever tried to love. But as she reached the tree line and looked back one final time at the pack house lights, her grandmother's moonstone pulsed warm against her chest. The old woman's voice seemed to whisper on the night wind, "True mates see past the surface." Maybe, Kathy thought, as she disappeared into the darkness, the true mate wasn't the one she'd lost. Maybe it was the one she had yet to find. 88% of you listening aren't subscribed, meaning thousands will miss the story that changes their week. While Kathy fights for the forgotten and cursed, hit subscribe so the next person who needs this hope doesn't miss it. Chapter 4: Exile and Survival. The forbidden forest stretched endlessly before Kathy, its ancient trees twisted into shapes that suggested suffering, its paths worn by creatures that shunned daylight and human contact. For 3 days she'd stumbled through the undergrowth, her cursed form making every step agony, her ruined voice unable to call for help, even if she'd wanted to. On the 4th morning, she found the cottage. It crouched between 2 massive oak trees, like something from a fever dream, its walls built from stones that seemed to shift color in the dappled sunlight. The roof sagged under the weight of moss and ivy, but the structure looked sound enough to offer shelter from the mountain cold that had been slowly killing her. The door stood slightly ajar, as if waiting for her arrival. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light that filtered through grimy windows. The furniture was ancient, but serviceable. A bed with a straw mattress, a rough wooden table, shelves lined with ceramic jars, whose contents had long since turned to powder. But it was the mirror hanging on the far wall that drew her attention, and held it, and finally forced her to confront what Morgana's curse had made of her. The thing staring back from the silvered glass couldn't possibly be human. Her face had become a nightmare of scars and deformity, skin pulled tight over bones that had shifted into wrong angles, features twisted into something that suggested a face without actually resembling one. Her hair hung in lank, colorless strands. Her eyes, the only part of her that remained unchanged, looked like islands of humanity in a sea of horror. She tried to speak, to say her own name, to prove to herself that she was still Kathy inside this monstrous shell. But the sound that emerged was that same horrible rasping that had haunted her since the curse took hold, less words than the memory of words, less voice than the echo of what voice had been. The first week was the hardest. Her human body, already weakened by 3 years of stress and poor self-care, struggled to adapt to the forest's demands. She couldn't hunt, had no claws, no supernatural speed, no predatory instincts. She survived on berries and stream water, on mushrooms she hoped weren't poisonous, on roots dug from the forest floor with her bare hands. But slowly, something extraordinary began to happen. The forest started to speak to her. It began as whispers at the edge of hearing, rustlings that sounded almost like words, bird songs that carried meaning beyond melody. She dismissed it at first, as hallucination brought on by hunger and despair. But as days turned to weeks, the communication became impossible to ignore. Lost one, the wind through the leaves seemed to murmur. Broken one, you hear us now. Kathy looked up from the handful of acorns she'd been trying to crack open, scanning the trees for the source of the voice. Here, came the whisper. Closer now, always here. You just couldn't hear before. A shimmer in the air caught her eye, translucent, barely visible, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But as she watched, the shimmer began to take shape. Vaguely humanoid, but clearly not human, with features that shifted like water, and eyes like starlight. A forest spirit, Kathy whispered, her ruined voice making the words sound like gravel sliding down a mountainside. You are changed, the spirit said, its voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The curse that broke you also opened you. Now you can hear the old magic, Speak the old tongue. Walk between the worlds as few humans can. I don't understand. The witch sought to punish you by revealing your true nature, but she was wrong about what that nature is. You are not human, little one. Not entirely. Your grandmother's blood carries older songs, bloodlines that predate the wolves, magic that remembers when the barriers between worlds were thin. Kathy's hand flew to the moonstone at her throat, the pendant her grandmother had pressed into her dying hands. It pulsed with warmth, as if responding to the spirit's words. She knew. The spirit continued. Your grandmother. She knew what you carried, what you could become. The curse merely awakened what was always sleeping inside you. Over the following weeks, more spirits made themselves known. Water sprites from the babbling creek that ran past her cottage, earth elementals that emerged from beneath ancient tree roots, fire spirits that danced in the flames of her small hearth. Each one taught her something new: how to call game without hunting, how to coax fruit from barren branches, how to speak to the forest itself and have it answer. The physical changes came gradually. Her twisted features remained cursed and hideous, but her body grew stronger, more adaptable. She could move through the forest without sound, could sense danger from miles away, could survive on less food and sleep than any human should require. She was becoming something new, neither human nor wolf, neither purely magical nor entirely mundane, something in between, something that belonged to the spaces others feared to tread. It was during her second month in the forest that she first saw the black wolf. She'd been practicing with the water spirits, learning to call rain from clear skies, when movement at the edge of the clearing caught her eye. A massive wolf stood between the trees, watching her with eyes that glowed not silver like her former packs, but gold, pure, burning gold like captured sunlight. Their gazes locked across the small distance, and Kathy felt something shift deep in her chest. Recognition, though she'd never seen this wolf before. Yearning, though she couldn't say for what. A pull as strong as gravity, as inevitable as the tide. The wolf stood perfectly still for a long moment, those golden eyes seeming to see straight through her cursed exterior to something deeper within. Then, without sound or warning, he melted back into the forest, leaving only the impression of power barely contained, and intelligence far beyond anything merely animal. That night, Kathy dreamed of golden eyes, and a voice that spoke her name with reverence instead of revulsion. She woke with tears on her scarred cheeks, and hoped she didn't dare examine too closely. The black wolf came back every few days, always watching, never approaching. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him at the edge of the clearing, where she practiced her new abilities. Sometimes she felt his presence in the forest around her cottage, a steady guard against the dangers that prowled the darker paths. "Who is he?" she asked the spirits one evening, as autumn began to paint the leaves in shades of fire. "One who has been waiting," came the cryptic reply. "One who sees with more than eyes, judges with more than appearance. Be patient, broken one. Not all truths reveal themselves at once." The waiting might have driven her mad, if not for the work of learning her new nature, of growing into powers she'd never suspected she possessed. The forest spirits taught her the old magics: how to heal with touch, how to speak to animals in their own language, how to see past the veils that separated different realms of existence. She was still cursed, still hideous, still abandoned by everyone she'd once loved, but she was no longer helpless. The creature Morgana had tried to create, weak, worthless, unworthy of love, had never truly existed. The curse had revealed not her weakness, but her strength. And somewhere in the deeper parts of the forest, golden eyes watched and waited, patient as mountains, constant as stars. The Alpha King was coming to choose a bride. Kathy had heard the news from a family of foxes who'd ventured close to the human settlements, had seen the announcement reflected in the still waters of the forest pools when she practiced her scrying. 3 trials to test the worthiness of candidates, 3 chances for the unwanted and forgotten to step forward and claim a destiny no one thought they deserved. Kathy stared at her reflection in the cottage's cracked mirror, studying the ruined features that marked her as monstrous to anyone who couldn't see past surfaces. The curse would break when the true Alpha King claimed her. Morgana's words had been meant as torment, as proof that Kathy would die alone and unloved. But what if Morgana had been wrong? What if the true Alpha King was not some distant theoretical figure, but someone already close enough to watch from the shadows? Someone whose eyes burned gold instead of silver, whose presence made her heart race with possibilities she didn't dare name. There was only one way to find out. That night, as the moon rose full and silver over the forest canopy, Kathy began to plan. She would enter the trials, she would compete for the Alpha King's hand, and she would discover, once and for all, whether true mates really could see past the surface, or if hope itself was just another kind of curse. Chapter 5. The King's Proclamation. News traveled fast through the supernatural world, carried on wings and 4 legs, whispered between trees and reflected in still water. The Alpha King was calling for a bride, and not just any bride. He was opening the ancient trials of worth to any female, regardless of pack affiliation, bloodline, or status. It was unprecedented, revolutionary, the kind of change that sent shockwaves through established hierarchies and made traditional powers tremble with uncertainty. Kathy learned of it from a parliament of owls who roasted in the ancient oak outside her cottage. Their soft hooting carried undertones of meaning that her transformed hearing could now interpret, painting pictures of grand proclamations and desperate preparations throughout the supernatural territories. The king seeks not just a queen, the eldest owl explained, her voice like wind through dry leaves, but one who can see beyond tradition, beyond expectation. The trials will test wisdom, heart, and courage in ways no simple bloodline contest ever could. What kind of trials? Kathy asked, her ruined voice no longer causing the forest creatures to flee in fear. Ancient challenges, forgotten tests, the trial of wisdom, to judge not just knowledge, but understanding, the trial of heart, to measure not just bravery, but sacrifice, and the trial of truth, to see past all veils and deceptions. Kathy's hand found the moonstone at her throat, its surface warm against her scarred fingers. Her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in her memory. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as curses, little one. Sometimes what breaks us is what makes us whole. For weeks, she wrestled with the decision. The rational part of her mind, the part that still remembered being Stephen's unloved wife, the part that had internalized years of Morgana's cruelty, insisted this was madness. Who was she to compete for the hand of the Alpha King, a cursed outcast, a creature so hideous her own mate had recoiled in horror? But the forest spirit saw deeper truths. You are not what you appear to be, they whispered on the night wind. The curse reveals as much as it conceals. You have become something new, something powerful. The question is not whether you are worthy of him, but whether he is worthy of you. The decision came to her at dawn, on the day before the trials began, when the black wolf appeared again at the edge of her clearing. This time, instead of watching from the shadows, he stepped into the open space where morning light could reveal him fully. He was magnificent, larger than any wolf she'd ever seen, his black fur gleaming like polished obsidian in the early light. But it was his eyes that stole her breath, those impossible golden orbs that seemed to hold depths of wisdom and pain, she recognized in her own reflection. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the clearing. Then, slowly, deliberately, the wolf lowered his massive head in what could only be described as a bow, a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement, of something that felt dangerously close to reverence. When he lifted his head again, those golden eyes held a message as clear as spoken words. Try. You are more than you know. Then he was gone, melting back into the forest shadows, as if he'd never been there at all. But the warmth of his regard lingered, wrapping around Kathy's heart, like a promise she didn't dare examine too closely. That evening, she stood before the cracked mirror in her cottage, and made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. She would enter the trials. She would compete for the Alpha King's hand, and she would do it not as the broken, desperate creature Morgana had tried to create, but as the powerful being she was becoming. The spirits helped her prepare. Water sprites showed her how to weave illusions around herself, not to hide what she'd become, but to allow others to see past their own prejudices and fear. Earth elementals provided clothing that would shift and adapt to whatever the trials demanded. Fire spirits blessed her with inner warmth that would sustain her through whatever ordeals lay ahead. "You carry more than your own hopes now," the eldest spirit told her as dawn approached. "You carry the dreams of all who have been cast aside, all who have been deemed unworthy. Show them that worth cannot be measured by appearance or bloodline alone." Chapter 6. Trial of Wisdom. The royal palace rose from the mountainside, like something carved from dreams and nightmares in equal measure. Its towers pierced the sky like crystal spears. Its walls gleamed with an inner light that had nothing to do with reflected sunlight, and its gates stood open to admit the hundreds of hopeful females who had come to compete for the Alpha King's hand. Kathy approached on foot, her simple traveling clothes marking her as different from the elaborately dressed she-wolves who arrived in gilded carriages and designer gowns. The illusion she wore was subtle, not hiding her cursed features, but allowing others to look past them to the strength beneath. She appeared unremarkable rather than horrifying, forgettable rather than repulsive. It was enough. The Great Hall of Trials was a marvel of supernatural architecture, its ceiling lost in shadows, its walls covered in murals, depicting the legendary matings of Alpha Kings and their chosen queens throughout history. Hundreds of females filled the space, wolves from every major pack, independent shifters, even a few vampires and fae, who qualified under the king's unprecedented open invitation. They were all beautiful, all powerful, all confident in ways Kathy had never been. But as she studied their faces, she saw something else: desperation masked as ambition, fear disguised as eagerness. They wanted to win, yes, but many of them didn't seem to know why, beyond the obvious benefits of power and position. A hush fell over the assembly as figures emerged onto the raised platform at the hall's far end. The Royal Council, ancient and powerful beings, whose combined authority had shaped the supernatural world for millennia. But Kathy's attention fixed on the figure who stepped forward to address the crowd, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and features that suggested both strength and intelligence. This was not the Alpha King. This was his representative, his voice, his proxy in matters of state. But where was the king himself? "Welcome, candidates." The representative's voice carried clearly through the vast space. "You have come seeking the hand of our sovereign, the Alpha King of all supernatural realms. But understand this: he seeks not just a queen, but a partner, not just a mate, but an equal. The trials you will face are designed not to eliminate the weak, but to reveal the truly worthy." A murmur ran through the crowd. Many of these females had expected a more traditional competition: displays of beauty, demonstrations of pack connections, perhaps a few ceremonial challenges. This sounded like something altogether more serious. "The first trial begins now," the representative continued. "The trial of wisdom. You will be presented with a riddle that has puzzled scholars for centuries. You have until sunset to provide an answer. Those who succeed will advance to the second trial. Those who fail," he shrugged elegantly, "will return home with our gratitude for their participation." The riddle was inscribed on a massive stone tablet that rose from the center of the hall, its ancient script glowing with soft blue light. "What protects the pack but cannot be seen, strengthens the bond but has no form, guides the wise but speaks no words, and when freely given, costs nothing, yet when demanded, cannot be bought." Kathy stared at the words, her mind racing. Around her, the other candidates had immediately begun forming study groups, comparing theories, debating possibilities. The obvious answers came first: love, loyalty, trust, honor. But something about the riddle's structure suggested a deeper meaning, a more complex truth. She found a quiet corner of the hall and settled into meditation, the way the forest spirits had taught her. Instead of attacking the riddle with pure intellect, she let her consciousness expand, reaching out to touch the ancient magic that permeated the palace walls. The stones themselves held memories, she realized. Centuries of Alpha Kings and Queens, of trials and tribulations, of bonds forged and broken, and threading through it all, one constant truth that made her breath catch in recognition. As the sun began to set, painting the hall's windows in shades of gold and crimson, the representative called for answers. One by one, candidates stepped forward to offer their solutions. "Love," said a stunning she-wolf from the Northern Territories. "Love protects the pack, strengthens bonds, guides the wise." "An admirable answer," the representative replied, "but incomplete. Love can be seen in actions, has form in gestures, speaks through words and deeds." "Honor," suggested a vampire noble, her pale skin gleaming in the torchlight. "Closer," came the reply, "but honor is visible in behavior, has form in oaths, speaks through conscience." More answers followed. Trust, faith, hope, wisdom itself. Each was acknowledged, considered, and ultimately found wanting. As candidate after candidate was politely dismissed, Kathy felt a strange certainty settle over her. She knew this answer. Not from books or education or careful study, but from lived experience, from years of being overlooked and undervalued, from months of learning to see past surfaces to deeper truths. "Loyalty," she said quietly, stepping forward as the final candidate to speak. "We have heard that answer already," the representative said gently. "It was found insufficient." "Not loyalty, as others understand it," Kathy replied, her ruined voice somehow carrying clearly through the vast space. "Not the loyalty that is sworn in oaths, or declared in grand gestures, but the loyalty that exists in small kindnesses, in staying when leaving would be easier, in serving without recognition or reward." She could feel the attention of everyone in the hall focusing on her now, but she pressed on. "This loyalty protects the pack, not through strength or strategy, but by ensuring no one is forgotten, no need goes unmet, no member stands alone. It strengthens bonds not by demanding reciprocation, but by giving freely without expectation. It guides the wise by showing them that true strength lies in lifting others up, not in standing above them." The representative's expression had grown thoughtful. "And why can it not be bought when demanded?" "Because true loyalty cannot be commanded or purchased," Kathy said, thinking of her years with Stephen, of all the ways she had tried to earn love through service. "It can only be given freely, chosen daily, offered as a gift rather than extracted as an obligation. When you demand loyalty, what you receive is only the appearance of it. The real thing must be cultivated through trust, through respect, through proving yourself worthy of another's devotion." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then the representative smiled. Not the polite, political expression he'd worn all day, but something genuine and warm. "The trial of wisdom is complete," he announced. "One candidate has shown not just knowledge, but understanding, not just intelligence, but insight. The trial of heart begins tomorrow at dawn." As the other candidates filed out, many shooting her curious or resentful glances, Kathy remained in the vast hall, staring up at the murals of legendary queens. She had passed the first trial, but something told her the challenges ahead would test far more than her ability to solve ancient riddles. From somewhere high above, in the shadows of the upper galleries, she felt the weight of observation. Someone was watching her, studying her, evaluating her worthiness, with an intensity that made her skin tingle with awareness. Golden eyes, she thought, though she couldn't be certain. Golden eyes that had been watching her for longer than she knew, waiting to see if she would prove herself worthy, not just of a crown, but of something far more precious. Chapter 7. Trial of Heart. Dawn came too soon, and not soon enough. Kathy had spent the night in the candidates' quarters, a luxurious suite that felt more like a prison of silk and marble than a place of rest. The other remaining candidates, only 12 had passed the wisdom trial, eyed her with mixtures of curiosity and disdain. She was the anomaly, the unknown quantity that had solved a riddle stumping supernatural nobility for generations. Some saw her as a threat to be eliminated. Others dismissed her as a fluke, a clever human who'd gotten lucky once, but would surely fail when faced with a real challenge. None of them knew what lay beneath the illusion she wore. None of them suspected that the unremarkable female in simple clothes carried magic older than their bloodlines, power born of suffering and transformation. The trial of heart took place in the palace's eastern gardens, where ancient trees formed natural amphitheaters around a series of challenging obstacle courses. But as Kathy studied the setup, she realized these weren't tests of physical prowess or supernatural ability. They were moral challenges, situations designed to reveal character rather than strength. The trial of heart, the representative announced to the gathered candidates, will test not your courage in battle, but your compassion in crisis. Each of you will face a choice between personal advancement and selfless action. Choose wisely. Your decision will reveal more than any display of power ever could. The first candidate, a powerful alpha's daughter from the eastern packs, faced her challenge with confident stride. Her obstacle course led to a pit where two figures lay trapped, one a fellow candidate who had twisted her ankle in a previous fall, the other a palace servant who had tumbled in while preparing the trial grounds. Above the pit, a rope ladder led to the next stage of the course. There was time to save one of the trapped figures before continuing, but attempting to rescue both would mean certain failure to advance. The alpha's daughter hesitated for perhaps 3 seconds before hauling the fellow candidate to safety and racing up the ladder, leaving the servant behind. Practical, strategic, understandable, and utterly heartless. Kathy watched candidate after candidate face similar choices. Save a competitor or advance your position, help the weak or preserve your strength, show mercy or demonstrate dominance. Again and again the pattern repeated, survival instincts and strategic thinking overriding compassion and selflessness. By the time her turn came, Kathy understood what the trial was truly testing, not courage, which was common enough among supernatural beings, but the rarer quality of putting others' needs before your own ambition. Her obstacle course led through a maze of thorny hedges that seemed to shift and change as she navigated them. At its heart, she found her own moral crossroads, a cavern entrance partially blocked by fallen stones, from which came the sounds of distress. 3 voices called for help. The first belonged to Lydia, Stephen's sister, her perfect white wolf form, trapped beneath a beam that had fallen during what looked like a cave-in. The second came from deeper in the cavern, a child's cry, terrified and growing weaker. The third was barely audible, an elderly voice, fading fast, from the deepest part of the cave system. Above the cavern entrance, carved into the stone itself, were the words, "Time permits the saving of one. Choose and face the consequences of your mercy." Kathy stared at the inscription, her mind racing. This was the cruelest choice yet, not between competitor and servant, but between 3 innocents, each deserving of rescue. Lydia, who had shown her kindness when no one else would. An unknown child whose life hadn't even truly begun. An elder whose wisdom would be lost forever if not preserved. Strategic thinking said, save Lydia. She was strong, capable, more likely to survive the trauma, and might even provide assistance in future challenges. Emotional appeal pointed toward the child, young, innocent, deserving of the chance to live and grow. Respect for wisdom suggested the elder, their knowledge and experience irreplaceable. But as Kathy stood frozen by impossible choice, she heard something else beneath the 3 distinct voices. A 4th sound, so subtle she almost missed it. The soft whimper of an animal in pain, coming from a side passage she hadn't initially noticed. Following the sound led her away from the main cavern to a smaller cave, where a wolf pup lay trapped under rubble, its leg clearly broken, its breathing shallow with pain and fear. Not a person at all, barely even noticed among the more dramatic cries for help, easy to ignore in favor of seemingly more important rescues. But Kathy had spent months learning to hear the voices others ignored, to value the forgotten and overlooked. The forest spirits had taught her that all life carried equal worth, that strength was measured, not in power, but in the willingness to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She gathered the injured pup carefully in her arms, feeling its small body relax, as her touch brought comfort and healing. Her grandmother's magic flowed through her fingers, knitting broken bones and easing pain. By the time she emerged from the side passage, the pup was sleeping peacefully against her chest. An interesting choice, came a voice from behind her. Kathy spun to find the representative watching her, but his expression was unreadable. The others in the main cavern. They need help too, she said, torn between her decision and the weight of the other voices still calling for rescue. Do they? The representative gestured toward the cavern entrance. As Kathy watched, the three distinct voices began to fade, the sounds of distress growing quieter, and finally stopping altogether. Illusion, she realized. The three trapped individuals had been magical constructs, tests designed to see what choice she would make when faced with impossible odds. Only the pup had been real. Only its pain had been genuine. The trial of heart is complete, the representative announced. Some candidates chose power over compassion. Some chose strategy over sacrifice. Some chose the obvious over the overlooked, but only one chose to hear the voice that others ignored, to value the life that others dismissed as insignificant. Kathy looked around, confused. Only one? But surely some of the others made practical decisions, reasonable choices, understandable selections, the representative finished. But the heart sees what the mind overlooks. The heart values what society dismisses. The heart chooses not based on potential reward, but on simple need. As they walked back toward the palace, the pup still sleeping in her arms, Kathy felt the weight of unseen observation again. Somewhere above, someone was watching her carry a creature others would have ignored, evaluating her worthiness, based not on grand gestures, but on small kindnesses. The final trial begins at sunset, the representative said as they reached the palace doors. The trial of truth. Are you prepared to face what lies beneath all veils and illusions? Kathy looked down at the pup in her arms, thinking of all the veils she wore, the illusion that hid her cursed features, the pretense that she belonged among these competitors, the hope she barely dared acknowledge that someone might see past all of it to the truth beneath. I don't think anyone can be truly prepared for that, she answered honestly. The representative's smile held approval, and something that might have been sympathy. Perhaps that honesty is preparation enough. Chapter 8. The Truth Unveiled. If Kathy's journey from cursed outcast to queen reminded you that your worth can't be destroyed by others' jealousy, don't let this moment pass without subscribing. The person who needed this story today was you. Honor that realization by clicking subscribe right now. Sunset painted the palace in shades of gold and crimson, transforming its crystalline walls into something that seemed to burn from within. Kathy stood in the candidates' quarters, staring at her reflection in the polished mirror, knowing this would be the last time she could hide behind illusions and half-truths. The trial of truth. Even the name sent shivers down her spine. She had been the only candidate to pass the trial of heart, a fact that should have filled her with triumph, but instead left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. The representative had explained that the final trial would be private, individual, a meeting with the Alpha King himself, where all pretenses would be stripped away. Truth cannot hide from truth, he had said, and the Alpha King sees all, not just what is shown, but what is concealed, not just what is said, but what remains unspoken. The pup she had rescued lay sleeping on her bed, its leg now fully healed, thanks to her grandmother's magic flowing through her fingers. She had named him Shadow, for the way he seemed to appear and disappear like the black wolf who watched her from the forest edges. Looking at his peaceful form, she remembered why she had chosen to save him over the more dramatic illusions, because sometimes the smallest gestures mattered most, because sometimes the forgotten deserved love simply for existing. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. A palace servant, elegantly dressed but with kind eyes, stood in the doorway. "Miss, the Alpha King will see you now." This was it. No more delays. No more preparation time. No more chances to rehearse what she might say when faced with the most powerful being in the supernatural world. Kathy took a breath, let her illusions fall away one by one, until she stood revealed in her cursed form, and followed the servant through corridors that seemed to stretch longer with each step. The throne room was not what she had expected. Instead of a vast, intimidating space designed to dwarf visitors and emphasize the king's power, she found herself in what appeared to be a private study. Comfortable chairs arranged around a fireplace, bookshelves lining the walls, windows that looked out over moonlit gardens. It felt intimate, personal, more like a place for conversation than royal audience. "You came," said a voice from the shadows near the fireplace. Kathy's heart stopped. She knew that voice, had heard it in her dreams for months, had imagined it speaking her name with tenderness instead of the revulsion she'd grown accustomed to. But it wasn't possible, couldn't be real, made no sense with everything she thought she understood about her situation. The figure stepped into the firelight, and Kathy's knees nearly gave out. Golden eyes, dark hair, the same impossible presence she'd felt watching her from the forest depths, but now in human form, tall, broad-shouldered, devastatingly handsome, in the way that supernatural royalty tended to be. This was the Black Wolf, who had observed her transformation, who had bowed to her in the clearing, who had somehow seen worth in what everyone else deemed monstrous. "You're him," she whispered, her ruined voice making the words sound like wind through broken glass. "You're the Alpha King." "I am," he said simply. "And you are Kathy, cast out by her pack, cursed by jealous magic, transformed by suffering into something far more powerful than she ever imagined herself to be." He moved closer, those golden eyes never leaving hers, and she realized he was seeing her, truly seeing her, not the illusion she'd worn during the trials, not the human facade she'd maintained for 3 years of marriage, but the cursed, scarred, monstrous truth of what Morgana's magic had made her. And he wasn't recoiling, wasn't looking away, wasn't showing any of the disgust that had driven her own mate to abandon her. "I've been waiting for you," he continued, his voice gentle as summer rain, "watching you find your strength in the forest, discover your power among the spirits, grow into the extraordinary being you were always meant to become." "I don't understand." Kathy's mind reeled, trying to reconcile the impossible. "How long have you been watching? Why didn't you when I was cursed, when I was cast out, when I was dying alone in the forest?" "Because you needed to discover your own worth first," he said, reaching out to touch her scarred cheek with fingers that trembled slightly, not from revulsion, but from reverence. "You needed to learn that your value didn't depend on others' acceptance, that your strength wasn't diminished by their blindness. I could have claimed you immediately, broken the curse the night it was cast, but then you would have always wondered, was I choosing you, or was I simply fulfilling magical obligation?" His thumb traced the worst of her scars, the one that pulled her mouth into a permanent grimace, and his touch was so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "The curse said I could only be freed when the true Alpha King claimed me," she whispered. "But you're claiming me now, and I'm still cursed in appearance perhaps, but not in truth." His other hand found the moonstone at her throat, and the pendant blazed with sudden light. "The curse was always conditional on your acceptance, not mine. It will break when you believe yourself worthy of love. Real love, unconditional love, the kind that sees past surface to soul." Kathy stared at him, this impossible man who spoke of loving her when she looked like something from nightmares. "How can you love this? How can you want something so hideous?" "Because I don't see hideous," he said simply. "I see a woman who saved a forgotten pup when glory beckoned elsewhere. I see someone who gave the correct answer to an ancient riddle, not through study, but through lived experience of invisible loyalty. I see a person who spent months learning to communicate with forest spirits, who discovered power in exile, who grew stronger in isolation than she'd ever been in acceptance." He stepped back slightly, giving her space to process his words, but his eyes never left hers. "The trials weren't really for me to choose a queen," he admitted. "They were for you to choose whether to trust me with your heart. I've known you were my mate since the night you first entered the forest. I've been waiting for you to know it too." "Your mate?" The words came out broken, disbelieving. "True mates see past the surface," he quoted, and Kathy's breath caught as she recognized her grandmother's dying words. "Your grandmother knew. She gave you the moonstone because it would recognize the bond when the time came, would guide you to the truth when you were ready to accept it. As if responding to his words, the pendant at Kathy's throat grew warm, then hot, then blazing with light that filled the entire room. She felt the curse fighting the magic, clinging to her features like a living thing reluctant to release its hold. But stronger than the curse was something else. The growing certainty that this man, this Alpha King, this impossible love, was exactly what her heart had been searching for without knowing it. "I choose you," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Not because you're a king, not because the curse compels it, but because you saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I was worthless, loved me when I was unlovable." The curse broke like shattered glass. Light exploded around her, through her, remaking her from the inside out. She felt her features shifting, bones realigning, skin smoothing into something that was neither her original human appearance, nor the monstrous form Morgana had forced upon her, but something entirely new, something that reflected the change in her soul as much as her body. When the light faded, she stood transformed, not into her former self, but into who she was meant to be, stronger, more beautiful than she'd ever been, but with eyes that held depths of wisdom earned through suffering, with hands that carried the memory of healing touch, with a presence that spoke of power found rather than inherited. "Now," the Alpha King said, pulling her into his arms as if she were precious beyond measuring, "now you are ready to be queen. Not because magic demands it, not because trials have proven it, but because you have chosen to believe in your own worth." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the dutiful touches she'd shared with Stephen. This was recognition, confirmation, homecoming, the meeting of two souls who had found their perfect match. When they broke apart, Kathy saw her reflection in his golden eyes, and finally truly understood what her grandmother had meant. True mates didn't just see past the surface, they saw the truth beneath all surfaces, the soul that remained constant through every change and challenge. "What happens now?" she asked, though she thought she already knew. "Now," he said with a smile that promised forever, "we rule together, we build a kingdom where worth isn't measured by bloodline or appearance, where the forgotten are remembered, and the cast out are welcomed home. We prove that the greatest power comes not from force, but from love freely given and graciously received." Through the study windows, Kathy could see the first light of dawn painting the sky in shades of hope. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the howl of wolves greeting the new day, not the pack that had rejected her, but the countless others who would soon know her as their queen. The curse was broken, the trials were complete, and the girl who had once been deemed unworthy of love had found not just acceptance, but a destiny greater than she had ever dared to imagine. Chapter 9. Final Confrontation. The coronation was set for the full moon, following the trials, a ceremony that would unite not just two souls but two destinies that would reshape the supernatural world. News of the Alpha King's choice had spread like wildfire through every pack, coven, and court, carrying with it whispers of revolution and change. Some celebrated the choice of a queen who understood what it meant to be overlooked and undervalued. Others raged against the precedent it set, that bloodline and traditional power structures might matter less than character and heart, but none could argue with the king's right to choose, or with the obvious bond that blazed between him and his intended queen when they appeared together. Kathy had spent the week since the trials learning what it meant to be royal. The palace staff treated her with careful respect, uncertain how to categorize someone who had arrived as a competitor but would soon rule over them all. She tried to bridge that gap with the same quiet service that had sustained her in the pack, learning names, asking about families, showing interest in the small details that made each person feel valued. "You'll make an extraordinary queen," the king told her one evening, as they walked through the palace gardens. He had asked her to call him by his name, Adrian, rather than his title when they were alone. "You understand that true authority comes from lifting others up, not standing above them." But even as they planned their future together, shadows gathered at the edges of their happiness. Reports reached them of unrest in various territories, of traditionalist factions organizing resistance to the changes the new queen represented. Some packs had already declared they would not recognize her authority, would not bow to someone they deemed unworthy of the crown. The worst news came from the Silver Moon pack. Stephen has declared the marriage invalid, Adrian told her, as they reviewed intelligence reports in his study. He's claiming prior rights as your first mate, saying the trials were a sham designed to circumvent pack law. Kathy felt a cold knot form in her stomach. And Morgana is backing his claim. More than that, she's gathering support from other witch wolves, building a coalition based on the argument that you used dark magic to seduce me, that the trials were tainted by supernatural influence. The irony was bitter. Morgana, who had cursed her with dark magic, was now accusing her of using the very powers that curse had awakened to manipulate the king. It was brilliant propaganda, taking the transformation that had made Kathy strong and twisting it into evidence of corruption and deceit. They're calling for a formal challenge, Adrian continued, his voice tight with anger. Single combat between you and Morgana, with Stephen's claim to be decided by the outcome. That's insane. Morgana is a witch-wolf hybrid with centuries of experience. I've been learning magic for a matter of months. Which is exactly why she's confident enough to issue the challenge. Adrian's golden eyes burned with protective fury. She thinks she can eliminate you and install Stephen as a puppet alpha under her control. She's not just trying to break our bond. She's attempting a coup against the crown itself. Kathy stared out the window at the moonlit gardens, thinking of all the times Morgana had made her feel small, worthless, undeserving of love or respect. The curse had been just the culmination of years of subtle cruelty, of systematic destruction of her self-worth. I have to accept, she said quietly. Absolutely not. Adrian's voice held the authority of centuries of rule. I won't allow it. We have armies, allies, other ways to handle this threat. No. Kathy turned to face him, decision crystallizing in her mind like ice forming on still water. Don't you see? If I refuse the challenge, if I hide behind your protection, she wins anyway. Every traditionalist faction, every resistant pack will point to it as proof that I'm weak, that I'm not worthy of the crown. The whispers will never stop. I don't care about whispers. But I do. And more than that, I care about what this represents. She moved to stand before him, placing her hands on his chest, where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heart. Morgana cursed me because she couldn't stand the thought of someone she deemed inferior rising above her station. If I don't face her now, I'm accepting her judgment. I'm agreeing that I don't belong here. Adrian covered her hands with his own, his touch warm and steadying. You could die. I could. Or I could prove once and for all that worth isn't inherited, that power isn't just about bloodline and tradition. I could show every cast out, every overlooked, every person who's been told they don't belong that they're wrong. They stared at each other in the lamplight, the weight of decision heavy between them. The forest spirits taught me that I'm not human, Kathy continued. Not entirely. My grandmother's bloodline carries older magic, power that predates the packs. Morgana awakened it when she cursed me, but she never understood what she was unleashing. What kind of power? Kathy smiled, thinking of the months she'd spent learning from elemental spirits, discovering abilities she'd never suspected she possessed. The kind that remembers when the barriers between worlds were thin, the kind that speaks to all living things, not just wolves. The kind that grows stronger through connection, rather than domination. The challenge was formally accepted 3 days later. By supernatural law, it would take place on neutral ground, an ancient stone circle in the mountains, where pack challenges had been settled for millennia. Representatives from across the supernatural world would witness the combat, lending legitimacy to whatever outcome emerged. As the date approached, Kathy found herself strangely calm, not because she was confident of victory. Morgana's power was vast and ancient, her experience in magical combat unquestioned, but because she finally understood what her grandmother had tried to tell her in those final moments. True strength wasn't about winning or losing, but about standing up for what mattered most, regardless of the cost. The night before the challenge, Adrian found her in the gardens where she often went to commune with the palace's earth spirits. I have something for you, he said, holding out a silver chain from which hung a pendant she'd never seen before. It was beautiful, a crystal that seemed to hold captured starlight, set in silver worked with symbols that made her think of home and belonging and love, that transcended all boundaries. "It's been in my family for generations," Adrian explained as he fastened it around her neck. "Legend says it will protect the wearer from any magic born of hatred or jealousy. I don't know if it's true, but you want me to have every possible advantage." Kathy turned in his arms, studying his face in the moonlight. "You know I might not come back from this." "Don't." His voice was rough with emotion. "Don't talk about not coming back. We just found each other. We just learned what it means to love without reservation. I can't lose you now." "You won't lose me," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Whatever happens tomorrow, what we have is eternal. Morgana can destroy my body, but she can never touch this." She placed her hand over his heart. Or this. She placed his hand over hers. They held each other in the garden as the moon set and dawn approached, neither speaking of the battle to come, both trying to memorize every moment of peace they might ever have together. Tomorrow, Kathy would face the woman who had cursed her, tormented her, tried to destroy her sense of self-worth. She would fight not just for her own life, but for the right of every overlooked person to claim their destiny. She would prove that love was stronger than hatred, that growth was more powerful than stagnation, that the future belonged to those brave enough to embrace change. Win or lose, she would face Morgana as herself, not the broken creature the curse had been meant to create, but the powerful, magical, worthy woman she had chosen to become. Chapter 10. Transformation and Justice. The stone circle stood ancient and weathered on the mountain top, its monoliths carved with symbols that predated written language. As dawn broke over the peaks, representatives from every major supernatural faction gathered to witness what many believed would be the defining moment of their age. Kathy stood at the circle's eastern edge, feeling the power of the place thrumming through the soles of her feet. This ground had seen challenges for millennia, disputes settled, fates decided, the balance of power constantly shifting with each victory and defeat. Today it would see something unprecedented, not just a challenge between individuals, but a confrontation between old ways and new possibilities. Morgana entered from the west, her silver hair gleaming like polished steel, her witch-wolf hybrid nature evident in the way she moved. Fluid grace combined with predatory intent. She wore traditional combat robes marked with symbols of her lineage, each one a reminder of power inherited and battles won. Behind her walked Stephen, his face a mask of determination, and something that might have been regret. "You came," Morgana said, as they faced each other in the circle's center. "I wasn't certain your newfound royal protection would allow it." "I chose to come," Kathy replied, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air, "just as I choose to stand here not as a victim of your curse, but as someone who has grown stronger because of it." Morgana's laugh was like breaking glass. "Stronger? You delude yourself, child. You may have fooled the king with whatever enchantment you've woven, but I see what you truly are, a cursed abomination pretending to be worthy of a crown." "Then let's settle this," Kathy said calmly. Around the circle, the gathered witnesses fell silent, sensing that something momentous was about to unfold. The formal words were spoken by the circle keeper, an ancient vampire, whose authority in matters of supernatural law was absolute. The rules were simple: magical combat, until one combatant yielded, was incapacitated, or died. No interference from seconds or allies. Victory would determine not just Kathy's right to marry the Alpha King, but the legitimacy of her claim to queenship itself. Morgana struck first, her magic lashing out like a whip of pure darkness. Kathy barely managed to dodge, feeling the spell sear past her face with heat that spoke of deadly intent. This wasn't going to be a test of skill or a demonstration of power. Morgana meant to kill her. "Too slow, little human," Morgana taunted, already weaving her next attack. "Did you think your forest spirits could teach you centuries of combat magic in mere months?" The second spell hit Kathy squarely in the chest, sending her sprawling across the ancient stones. Pain exploded through her ribs as she struggled to breathe, to focus, to remember the lessons the elemental spirits had tried to teach her. Not about force, she heard the wind whisper, about connection, about understanding that all magic comes from the same source. Kathy pushed herself to her knees, dodging another blast of dark energy by rolling behind one of the standing stones. Morgana was right. In terms of raw power and combat experience, this wasn't even a contest. But raw power wasn't the only kind of magic. Placing her hands flat against the ancient stone, Kathy reached out with her consciousness, touching the deep magic that had been building in this place for millennia. The circle itself was alive with accumulated energy, layer upon layer of challenges and victories, and defeats, creating a reservoir of power that few knew how to access. "Come out, little mouse," Morgana called, stalking around the stone like a cat playing with wounded prey. "Hiding won't save you. Nothing will save you, just as nothing saved you from my curse." "You're right about one thing," Kathy said, standing and stepping into the open. "Nothing saved me from your curse. But something saved me from myself, the belief that I was worth saving." She reached for the pendant Adrian had given her, feeling its warmth pulse against her palm. But more than that, she reached for the moonstone her grandmother had pressed into her dying hands, the one that had guided her through every moment of transformation and growth. The two pendants blazed with light as their magic intertwined, creating something neither could accomplish alone. Kathy felt her grandmother's love flowing through the moonstone, Adrian's devotion channeling through the family pendant, the forest spirit's wisdom singing through her connection to the natural world. "Impossible," Morgana breathed, her next spell faltering as she stared at the growing radiance surrounding Kathy. "You never understood," Kathy said, power building around her like a second skin. "You thought the curse would break me, would reveal me as something weak and worthless. But it revealed something else entirely, that worth isn't about appearance or bloodline or what others think of you. It's about what you choose to do with the love you're given, how you use your pain to help others heal." She raised her hands, and magic flowed from her, not the harsh, dominating power Morgana wielded, but something gentler and infinitely stronger. Earth magic that spoke to growing things, water magic that soothed and healed, air magic that carried hope in dreams, fire magic that burned away what no longer served. "This isn't possible," Morgana snarled, lashing out with everything she had. "You're nothing, human trash, cursed refuse." But her spells couldn't touch Kathy now. The magic flowing through her was older than hatred, deeper than jealousy, stronger than fear. It was the magic of connection, of love freely given and graciously received, of worth that came from within, rather than being bestowed from without. Kathy's power surrounded Morgana like an embrace, not attacking but enveloping, not destroying but transforming. She felt the other woman's magic fighting against her own, felt centuries of bitterness and resentment and fear-based power struggling against something it couldn't understand or defeat. "You cursed me to become hideous," Kathy said as her magic tightened around Morgana like a cocoon. "Let's see how you like living with the face that matches your heart." The transformation was swift and merciless. Morgana's perfect features twisted and warped, her silver hair turning dull and brittle, her graceful form becoming bent and gnarled. But it wasn't just physical change. Kathy's magic stripped away the illusions Morgana had used to hide her true nature, revealing the corruption and cruelty that had always lurked beneath her beautiful exterior. "No!" Morgana screamed, her voice now the same horrible rasp Kathy had endured for months. "This isn't. You can't." "I can, and I have," Kathy said quietly. "The curse reflects the caster's true nature back upon them. You made me hideous, because you couldn't bear to see your own ugliness reflected in someone else's happiness. Now you'll understand what it feels like to be judged by appearance alone." Morgana collapsed to her knees, her hands clawing at her changed face. Around the circle, the gathered witnesses stirred with a mixture of awe and unease. They had expected a battle of magical forces, not this strange justice that seemed to rewrite the very nature of revenge. "It's over," Kathy announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the ancient circle. "The challenge is complete. I claim victory not through dominance, but through understanding, not through destruction, but through transformation. She turned to face the assembled representatives, her power still blazing around her like captured starlight. Let it be known throughout all supernatural territories. The old ways of determining worth are ended. No longer will bloodline determine value. No longer will appearance define acceptance. No longer will the forgotten and cast out be denied their rightful place in our world. The Circle Keeper stepped forward, his ancient voice resonating with authority. The challenge is complete. Victory goes to Kathy, future queen of all supernatural realms. Let all here witness and spread word of this decision. But even as the formal words were spoken, Stephen pushed forward, his face desperate with something that might have been love or might have been possession. "Kathy, please," he said, falling to his knees before her. "I was wrong. I was blind, foolish, weak. Come back to me. Come home to the pack that needs you." Kathy looked down at him. This man who had been her mate for 3 years, who had chosen her publicly only to abandon her privately, who had recoiled from her cursed form without ever trying to see the person beneath it. "I am home," she said gently but firmly. "I found it in a forest cottage, in conversations with spirits, in the love of someone who sees my soul rather than just my surface. You had your chance to love me when I was broken and desperate for acceptance. You don't get to claim me now that I'm whole." She turned away from his pleading, walking toward where Adrian waited at the circle's edge. Her future lay not in returning to old patterns and familiar pain, but in building something entirely new. As she reached Adrian's side, he pulled her into his arms, his golden eyes blazing with pride and love and infinite tenderness. "My queen," he whispered against her hair, "my mate, my equal in all things." "And you are my king," she replied, feeling the truth of it resonate in her bones. "My partner, my home." Behind them, Morgana's wails of rage and despair echoed off the ancient stones, but Kathy didn't look back. The woman who had tried to destroy her was getting exactly what she had always deserved, a chance to understand what her cruelty had cost, what her jealousy had created, what her hatred had brought into the world. The coronation took place 3 days later, with representatives from every supernatural faction in attendance. Some came to show support for the new order Kathy and Adrian represented. Others came to witness history in the making. A few came to plan resistance to changes they couldn't accept. But as Kathy knelt before the ancient altar where alpha kings and queens had been crowned for millennia, as the ceremonial circlet was placed upon her head, as she rose to face her subjects for the first time as their acknowledged ruler, she felt the weight of destiny settling around her like a perfectly fitted crown. She was no longer the unwanted human wife of a minor alpha's son. She was no longer the cursed creature driven into exile by jealous magic. She was queen of all supernatural realms, partner to a king who loved her completely, leader of a kingdom where worth would be measured not by bloodline but by character. The forgotten would be remembered. The cast out would find welcome. The broken would discover that their scars could become sources of strength rather than shame. And in a forest cottage where she had once learned to survive alone, where spirits had taught her to value herself, where a black wolf had watched and waited with golden eyes full of patient love, the small pup she had rescued slept peacefully, dreaming of pack runs under starlit skies, and a queen who remembered that sometimes the smallest gestures mattered most. The curse was broken. The kingdom was reborn, and true love, the kind that sees past every surface to the soul beneath, had conquered all. What would you have done in Kathy's place during the trials? Share your favorite moment of Kathy's transformation in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us that our worth isn't determined by others' expectations, but by our own courage to claim the love we deserve.